So welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
So for everyone who's not me particularly, who are you?
That includes me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Dave Jones from Birmingham, Alabama, in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend Adam Curry and I started a project called the Podcast Index.
Mm-hmm.
It's at podcastindex.org. We started that back in August, as we were just talking about it. I was mentioning to you that we did I did the first code commit on this project on August the 6th. And the idea for it came up in July. So it was very rapid. Adam had had the idea for it. And then we said, well, let's go. And so what was helped by that a lot is that we had a lot of pre-existing code that I could draw from. So,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the podcast index is, it's not a nonprofit, but just because in the U.S., I think me and Adam were both. We can get into some of that later if you want to. We're both a little disenchanted with the whole nonprofit aspect of things. So we just started a business to pay just have something to pay the bills with, and we started out of our own pocket. And the whole idea is to preserve podcasting as a platform for free speech. That's that's our first goal.
Yeah.
And then our second goal is to reimagine podcasting as a platform of value, and that one's a little more squishy, of a goal. It's not as straightforward, but we do have, but it is clear to us, and we can talk about that if you want to also, as well. But that's the idea, and if you want to sum it up and wrap it into a big package, you could say that what we're trying to do is take back the open nature of podcasting by means of an open, freely accessible directory and API that anyone can use for no cost. And the goal there is to take that directory infrastructure back so that Apple or Google is not the center of the universe when it comes to podcasting. So that was the whole framework that we came up with at the beginning, because podcasting is a beautiful open standards ecosystem built on RSS and XML and decentralized web infrastructure, but the directory, the yellow pages, so to speak, for the U.S. people, the directory for podcasting is all really held by Apple.
Yeah.
And it's not that Apple's a bad actor in any way. They've been fantastic. They've worked. They've really made podcasting, or been a piece of what podcasting has become today. But it doesn't make any sense for the entire ecosystem of podcasting to be open and free, except perhaps the main, crucial, most important aspect of it, which is being able to find them.
Yeah, it's such a strange thing, really.
It is. Yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah, I don't know if there's been any. I mean, no, what Apple's usually like. I guess there hasn't been anyone sort of telling the story of what's been going on inside Apple, because they sort of made this little push for podcasting way back when, and then they sort of left it in some kind of more or less benign and neglect almost.
Yeah,
for a long time, right?
Yeah, and that's one thing that we had thought, had talked about too in creating the project, is there's not been much advancement. Now you can look at apps and say, well, apps have a lot more features than they used to, and that's thanks to individual app developers, mobile app developers specifically, like Xavier, who does Podcast Addict, Marco, who does Overcast. There has been advancement in some of these areas, but from an infrastructure standpoint, from the aspect of how RSS is delivered and the XML namespaces and the structure, just the whole structure of the ecosystem on the back end, that really hasn't advanced much at all.
No.
And there's been a lot of discussion around, well, should we just ditch XML altogether and go to more of a JSON XML feed universe for podcasting? And that, to me, and we can, if we want to talk about this, that's fine. But I don't think that's really feasible, and I don't think it's necessary. And I think that would, changing away from XML, I think that would actually be detrimental to the ecosystem. But so we thought, well, instead of trying to reinvent all this stuff, well, let's just try to jump in here and see what we can do to advance these things. Create a namespace where we can pull a lot of new tags that people have been wanting to into it, and then we can, since we have a directory and an API, we can allow people. We can be the first consumers of that namespace. Yeah. So once we have the namespace, we can consume it, and then we can push it back out through our API. And any developers that use our index and our API, they'll be the first ones to be able to use that stuff, and they won't have to wade through the chicken and egg problem of a new namespace comes out, but nobody produces it. So then you don't know if you're consuming it correctly.
Yeah. It's I mean, it is a big chicken and egg problem in many ways, but still, it feels a bit strange that nobody's really been able to make or even tried, as far as I know, to make this push before.
I think there's been attempts. Yeah, there's definitely been people trying. Podlove. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Podlove, but they have done a lot of work. I'm not sure if Podlove may be German-based company.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel bad for not knowing that, but yeah, Podlove has tried to do they've done chapters, and they have a namespace and things like that. And people have been wedging things in. So like one of the things we saw was we wanted a clear way in our names in the podcast namespace to put in funding, a link to, so you could just link to your Patreon or link to your PayPal or whatever. Yep. And what we found out is that that has evolved, and people have been using Atom links for that, and with a certain rel equal attribute. And so
it's in Overcast, right?
Mm-hmm, it is, yeah. And so we thought, well, that's people have been just kind of like tacking things on here and there, but there's no widespread coherence or adoption for these things. Like, you don't even know they exist until you read in an article that Overcast is now supporting this one thing, or Podcast Addict is now doing this one thing. And so that's what we found out. So you have Overcast over here who's supporting the rel equal link payment tag, and then you have Podcast Addict over here who's supporting Buzzsprout's transcript specification. Mm-hmm. And so you have people doing their own thing all over the place, and we're like, well, why don't we just try to bring everything into one standard, and so that there's no ambiguity here, and everybody can just say, well, we'll adopt the standard. And that all, of course, that has its drawbacks, and everybody wants to reference that XKCD comic about 14 all the different standards, but we thought it was a worthwhile goal, and so far we've seen lots and lots of adoption. So I mean, I think it's been, just in the short period of time we've tried to do this, I think it's been successful.
Yeah, and you've been moving really fast with the namespace standard as well. At least it feels like that to me. It feels like it's been moving really efficiently. And
it has, and I'd like to slow it down a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine as the person sort of driving it.
Yeah, just for my own sanity.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to breathe a bit sometimes as well.
Yeah.
But did you have the ideas about creating the namespace as well, right when you started the index, or did that come as a sort of natural next step?
Pretty early on. The index was definitely first, and we wanted to have an open API. And I'll stop here and I'll say that our model is based on what Adam has always called the value for value model.
Mm-hmm.
And that is you create something that you think is valuable, you give it away, and then you ask honor system, you ask that if anyone is consuming this and got value from it, that they just return that value to you in the form of money, time. He calls it time, talent, and treasure. So, like, people. What we have done is we rolled out the API, and we said, well, this will always be free. If we have to pay for it out of our own pocket, we'll do that, and that's what we did for the first couple of months. But if you can support us, if you're using the API, or if you just believe in the project and believe in the idea, then the goals, then give us a donation. And so we have donation links, and people have been donating enough to cover our hosting fees for the last couple of months.
Yeah,
and it's been great. We don't anticipate that we'll ever be able to take any sort of, salary or anything off of this. It'll probably always just be enough to cover itself, but that's fine. And that's not the goal anyway. So that's sort of the whole model. And it was born out of trying to solve a problem that Adam realized, I guess maybe over the last few years, that, he had such a deep hand in creating creating podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized that he had left one critical piece out of that, and that's the app developers. And so you have
interesting point there.
Yeah, you have podcasters that can make money. Some make lots of money.
Yeah.
You have hosting companies like Blueberry, Buzzsprout, Fireside, Transistor, Captivate, ACAT, all these hosting companies. They all make money. Some more than others. Yeah. Then you have the guys that sell the sound gear. They're making lots of money. All those guys
selling the shovels.
Yeah, exactly, picks and shovels. And so you have everybody in the chain who's making maybe not lots of money, but enough to live on. And then at the sort of the bottom of the chain, you have the app developers who write podcast apps, and they've been left to just sell their app for 99 cents on an app store or using free within app purchases.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy because they're the most important piece of the whole chain.
Yeah.
But they most of them can't make a living. You've got a few like Podcast Addict and Overcast that make enough, but most of the app developers who try to break into that market, it's just not. It doesn't work.
No. So
we thought, well, in order to lower the barrier of entry for that, we want the index to survive, but we're also going to need an API because what we wanted to do was lower the barrier of entry for podcast app developers so low they could just spin up a $5 a month server on a cloud host and just start writing their own app and consume our API and not have to run 25 servers with aggregators and all this jazz. So that was the whole idea. And then we say, well, hey, if your app is successful in the future, consider donating something back to us to support us.
Yeah.
So we're really trying to fix that part of the problem in the podcast ecosystem where the app developers really have just been left out in the cold for a very long time because they are the bread and butter of what makes podcasting what it is. They really are.
Yeah, and I mean, a good app makes such a big difference to the whole experience as well. I mean, it has maybe one or two features that I didn't know I needed, but now I probably can't live without them. And it's easy enough to find podcasts and add them and subscribe in the way I like, or just sort them the right way, or whatever it might be.
What is your podcast player of choice?
I'm an Overcast person.
Okay.
Yeah. Not really. Well, I realize that there's some stuff about how subscriptions work that probably keeps me there a bit because I tried an Android phone for a while and switched to Pocket Casts.
Mhm.
And then I realized that I like to have tons of podcasts that I don't actively subscribe to, but I look through them for new stuff when my list is empty.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and that works really nicely. I probably started doing it because it worked so nicely in Overcast. But then then I exported and imported it into Pocket Cast, and like 1 million podcasts with like one episode each.
Coming out of your OPML file was, 10 megabytes.
Make it stop somehow.
Yeah, right. I got you.
Yeah, so I think I've been sort of I've adapted myself to suit Overcast, and Overcast suits me. So
yeah, I'm an Overcast user too most of the time, and what we've seen or what we've developed over the last 3 to 4 weeks really is the what we call the value tag or value block, and that's part of goal 2, and the goal 2 was to reimagine podcasting as a platform of value, and that it's really at the core of what we both believe. So I'm trying to figure out how to say this. We envision a future where listeners support podcasters directly. What has happened, or what is happening currently, you have big players like Spotify and Anchor, which is Spotify as well.
Yeah, true.
And a lot of big actors in the podcast space who are driving this advertising model deeper into the bones of what podcasting is, so that now when you think of monetizing your podcast, you all you think of is just ads.
Yeah.
It's been great to see other people doing to see this resurgence of sort of a member supported idea, but through Patreon and things like that, and that's sort of background radiation underneath that's simmering, but really on the big in your face way to monetize is advertising.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is we would like everyone to be able to do a direct listener supported model where you don't have to depend on advertising, because what we believe deeply is that advertising is censorship. And that means that if you have ads on your show, you're going to censor in some way, whether it's overtly through not talking about a competitor to the advertiser, or maybe it's you are thinking in the back of your mind the whole time about whether the advertiser would want you to talk about a specific topic or not. So you're self-censoring in that way.
Yep.
And when you depend on $500 or $1,000 a month from an advertiser to help pay your bills, that has a big sway on what you decide that you will talk about on your show.
Yeah.
And so what we've tried to do is we created this thing called the value block, and it's out there. It's out there like it's the future. And so we created the value tag, and this basically allows you to specify Bitcoin Lightning addresses in the XML of your feed. And so as people listen to your podcast in their podcast player, the podcast player sees those addresses, and it will begin to stream micropayments through the Bitcoin Lightning Network directly to your Bitcoin Lightning node. And so you get paid directly as people listen, and listeners can move that slider up and down and say, well, I want to give this person 100 Satoshis a minute, or I want to give this podcast 10 Satoshis a minute. But, and so people can sort of dial their donation level up or pledge level up and down. And so that's what we hope is the future of direct listener supported podcasting.
Yeah.
And it's all built on that value for value model. You don't have to donate if you don't want to. You can keep your slider at 0 and you can just listen.
Yeah.
But if you want to, you can dial it all the way up to 1,000 and just really, heavily support one show that you love.
Yeah.
So that's what we consider the future, and that's what we're trying to position things where that becomes not just an option, but a viable option for people to actually make real money in a way that doesn't make them change their content of their podcast to suit an advertiser.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and the reason I brought that up was because we're talking about Overcast, and what I've noticed is the first podcast app that we have that supports the value tag and the Lightning model is the Sphinx chat app.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been moving as podcasts adopt the tag. I can see them in the index, and I can see them. Okay, well, there's a new one that supports the tag, and as soon as they do, I flip over to my Sphinx app and I put that podcast in there. So now what I found is I'm bouncing between the Sphinx app and the Overcast app, depending on if I know that I can pay this podcaster by listening in the Sphinx app, I'll go over there and listen, and I just delete that feed out of my Overcast.
Yeah.
And it's had this weird psychological effect of when I have to go if something goes wrong with Sphinx, because it's still in test flight, still in beta.
Mm-hmm.
If something goes wrong with Sphinx and I have to flip back over to Overcast to listen to that podcast, I feel guilty.
Yeah.
I do. I feel like I'm cheating.
I was intending to support this more actively.
Yeah. It's like I know that if I was listening in the other app, they'd be getting paid.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it actually psychologically, it really does have an effect on a listener when you know that you could, you can support, not really just by listening, not by doing anything else other than just listening to the podcast.
Yeah. If I'm in this app, I'm doing the even better version of listening to a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it's funny because we have thought about that, like the app loyalty thing, and I've used Overcast for years, and I thought, okay, well, there's nothing that'll ever take me away from Overcast,
Mm-hmm.
but there is. It really wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, now I just bounce back and forth, and it's really fine. It's not a big deal.
I mean, it is one of those classic. Yeah, but this app has this killer feature,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, it can be value and supporting and.
Yeah.
It took me a while to wrap my head around it when you started talking about it, the value tag and stuff in the Podcasting 2.0 episode.
Oh, okay.
I was like, okay, I'm starting to think about these phase 1 tags, and it makes sense. It's nice and like down to earth. And then there's this thing. Whoa, lightning! What happened? Oh, wait a minute.
It's a very steep learning curve. Steep learning curve. Yeah, and it's going to take a while. Yeah, it's definitely going to take. We think it'll be easier it'll be much easier for Bitcoin wallet apps to adopt podcasting than for podcast apps to adopt Lightning.
Unless someone provides some kind of more turnkey sort of library or something, I guess. I mean, there should be a market for that as well.
Yeah, the Sphinx guys they're putting together libraries for that, and we're hoping over the next year that landscape will be better, so that as a developer you can just go out and drop those libraries in and get started. And I think the Breeze Lightning Wallet app, which is also still in test flight, they're an open source. They have open source projects as well. And I think they may end up creating, if we understand them correctly, they may end up creating like a shell app, that you can take and have something as a base to begin to start with.
Yeah,
that'll be that. I think that'll, once we can get some of that'll drive adoption. Just because developers are busy.
Yeah.
If you got to go off and learn, spend 2 months learning how Lightning works, you're just not going to do it.
Yeah. It's too true. And another thing that I thought was really, really smart about the whole value tag was this support for various splits. So different people can get the various parts of the support. And
Yeah.
I mean, that should be a really good way of supporting a general library as well, because then you can give the library author some support.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. And you're not, that really came home to me when I was listening to Anita Posch. She's a German Bitcoin podcaster,
Mm-hmm.
and we helped her get it set up. I think she was maybe the second podcast to do the value tag. She jumped on board very quickly,
Wow.
and we got her set up in the index with her value tag and put her podcast into Sphinx. And I started listening to it, and she was interviewing. She has a series right now where she's interviewing prominent Bitcoiners from Africa.
Ooh,
And
interesting.
yeah, it's a great show. And so I started listening to that on Sphinx, and so every minute I'm listening, she's getting some Bitcoin donations, and her guest was saying how his show had been deplatformed by YouTube and by Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't know why. He thinks it has something to do with a prize or a contest that he tried to win, that he did for his listeners, where he was giving away some Bitcoin. But he has no idea. He couldn't get any answers from the platforms, but they just took his show off.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, that this is a great example of the splits, because you can, if Anita in this episode could have broken off maybe a 10% split for this guest. And just from being on her show, he could begin to get, donations and pledges.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great incentive to have guests on your show. It's a great incentive to have, like you said, app developers, library developers. You can split these payments out any way you want to.
Yeah.
And then in the future, even if it's 10 years in the future, and somebody listens to that episode in your back catalog, that person gets paid.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that struck me was, paying for the music you play in the podcast.
Oh yeah,
Would be such a natural thing as well. I mean, it's not like you get much money for being played on Spotify. You might make more from podcasts if you.
That's right. And Art, like on Adam's show, the No Agenda show, they have individual episode art that's donated by artists each time. So why not put in a 5% split for the artist?
Yeah,
exactly. It really puts puts everything back into the hands of the podcaster where it should be. But part of that model is the defaults we're trying to set up with that is that the app developer gets a minimum 1% split. So for podcast app developers, and this is really how we're trying to fix the monetary problem for podcast apps, is if I listen every minute, 98% of the Bitcoin is going to the podcaster, 1% is going to the index or the platform or the host that's providing the service or the API, and 1% is going to the app developer. So the app developer is getting paid all the time as people use their app, which is kind of the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
If you love that app enough to use it on a consistent basis, then why not pay for it? Obviously you like it. You don't have to; it's not required. But if you decide to pay something to the podcaster, then the app gets a part of that too. Yeah. And we're hoping that if that model lives on and ends up playing out the way we hope it does, we're hoping that will incentivize more people to jump into the app space, more developers, because it's really sort of a desert out there. You got a couple of big players and really nobody else.
Yeah, it's sort of like the podcast index space as well. It's shockingly empty.
It is, yeah, it really is. Now, are you a mobile developer? What type of programming do you do?
At work, I mostly do web front end. Really, I've done a bit of iOS and done a bit of Mac development. So I've been switching back and forth. So I've done a little bit of iOS development before. I had a small app on the App Store and stuff like that, but I consider myself more of a sort of web developer, I guess.
What made you decide to jump to do the Chapters app on Mac?
Well, it's a pretty unusual story, I guess. But I mean, from the start, I've been wanting to make a Mac app because I'm a Mac user through and through, and everyone at work is sort of an Apple enthusiast as well. So I've been sort of looking for a nice idea for something that's useful but not too big to tackle in your spare time, stuff like that.
Right.
And podcast chapter was actually started by a British guy, Thomas Pritchard, I think.
Okay.
And and the thing is, he released it a couple of years back, and then it did its job nicely, and then Forecast came out, and he was making some money, by the way, as far as I understand it, from podcast chapter, but not that much, and he had other commitments, so the app sort of stayed where it was. And also he wrote it in Swift when the language was like 1.0 or something.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Yeah. so there was, I emailed him about some bug in podcast chapter because I was a user of it and enjoyed it, and he responded that, yeah, this is kind of sad, but I don't have the resources to put into it because this is Swift 1.0, and now I don't know if it was 1.2 or 1.3.
So he said, "Do you want it? You can have it."
No, I actually offered to help. Like,
okay.
Could I try my hand at bringing this up because if we can just get it to build properly in the first place on new versions of Swift, we can at least fix this little bug and make a new version. And so I nagged him into letting me help him. And then, so we did a release or two where I fixed a few bugs, because I mean, I'm a user of the app. I win if this app keeps on evolving. So then he offered to let me take over the app a year or so later. So then I became the main developer.
Okay.
So that's kind of the route it took.
And are you fully up to Swift 5 or wherever we're at on the latest version of Swift?
No, not really. I mean,
okay.
I make sure it builds and fix the warnings and deprecations and stuff like that. But I'm not using all the latest features. Definitely not.
Okay, I've written a little bit of Swift, and I've written a couple of apps in Swift. One of them is in production, and the other one is just never got off the ground. It's still just languishing on my phone. But I really like the Swift language. I'll say that for me, I've written things in almost every language you can think of. I'm not a professional programmer. That's not my day job. I'm a system administrator, and but I've been programming for 35 years. Yeah. And naturally I've got production code in just every language possible: C#, PowerShell, Swift, C, Perl, PHP. I mean, you name a assembly language. We have production code in assembly language.
Wow.
On Windows, but it's using the MASM 32 package. But so I've written some Swift, and I love it. I actually love it a lot, but I don't. It's like I can't find a use case for it outside of the Apple ecosystem, and for me to really commit to a language. I don't know how you feel about this, but maybe it's from all the web development stuff that I've done. To really commit to a language, I feel like it needs to be. I got to be able to use it in more than just one specific place.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I definitely wouldn't have picked up Swift at all unless it was what Apple was pushing for, and I want to develop on Apple platforms. I want to make apps, but otherwise I wouldn't have picked it up. So I'm one of those people who, if I go into something new, I look at what's sort of the default here. That seems like a good path, good way to start. But I agree. I mean, I wouldn't, if I was just looking at languages out there and picking something for sort of, I don't know, general use, I wouldn't have picked Swift either. I mean, I guess some people are using it for like server-side web stuff, but it still feels like it's only natural if you're quite heavily into writing code for Apple clients as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Vapor, is it Vapor that's on the server side?
That sounds right.
I haven't looked at that at all, and the reason I haven't looked at it is because I guess I'm not that interested in server side compiled language.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when it comes to the podcast index is still it's PHP on the API side, and then the aggregators themselves, the aggregators and parsers are in Node.js, and PHP is not obviously the best language in the world, but it has a quick feedback loop.
Yeah.
And so you can just you can do rapid development in it. And I think we're beyond. I was thinking about this the other day. I think we've grown now beyond the point where the language layer is the critical part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
As on the server back end, your database and your front end are really going to be your main bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
The back end code itself, whether it's written in PHP or Node or Python or whatever, that just doesn't feel like you're the place where you're going to spend most of your time trying to optimize.
No, I agree.
I mean, because you've got, there's the server power is it's big enough now, and you have things like, so take a slow language like PHP. I mean, we run that in PHP FPM,
mm-hmm.
and so those scripts stay resident all the time. And it's not they're already just sitting there ready to run, and unless you do something really stupid, your code is not going to be the slow part.
No,
a bad SQL query that's gonna wreck you way more often than a bad choice for how to iterate something in PHP. So,
yeah. I mean, it's so rare that the actual language choice actually matters as long as you know what you're doing in the language. I think that's sort of underrated sometimes.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. And I don't on the PHP side, I don't know whether this came from. It's kind of an interesting topic. I've written plenty of object-oriented PHP, but I always fall back to just straight functional PHP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it may be because my original, when I got started programming, was in BASIC on the Commodore 64, and this was, gosh, in the 80s, I guess.
In the 60s.
And yeah, right. And and I got started in that, and then pretty quickly my next language was C. And then after that, I started doing a lot of assembly language. And I stayed in assembly language for many, many years. And that's not something, obviously, that's object oriented. And so, it's fun. It's subroutines and macros.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of that, my brain doesn't really, I just think more linearly. And I've written some object oriented PHP, and obviously if I'm in an object oriented language, I do that way. But if I'm in a language that allows for functional or linear programming, I always fall back into that just because I guess my brain just thinks in a straight line. But but it's nice because you have that old. It feels like C to me, where you have a header file, or and then you have an implementation file, and you can just include the file, and you've got your library. You've got everything available to you, and so that it just feels like something that I don't have. To me, that feels like the language is not getting in the way. Versus something like Objective C, where it feels like I'm just having to fight the. That's why I tried to write Objective C multiple times, and I just said I can't do this. It just felt like I was having to fight the language all the time.
Yeah, or fighting the whole environment. I mean, speaking of things getting in the way, like setting up something for modern web development. I mean, setting something up from scratch and getting something you can deploy on a server can be. I mean, it is such a silly nightmare. It's such a big stack of things on top of each other, and like compilers and transpilers and interpreters and packages. So many packages and modules and.
The Webpack stuff is just a maze. I don't, it terrifies me because I'm a sysadmin guy, so I'm thinking of security all the time, and I install this Webpack stack, and I'm like, oh my god, because the first thing it tells you is when you do npm install on it, it tells you, oh, there's 8 critical remote code executions in this, and I'm like, I don't even know how to fix it because there's 45 packages here. And so you just you run npm audit fix and just hope for the best.
Yeah. Oh, the number went down.
Yeah, now it's only 2 critical remote code executions. I'm like, okay, I guess we'll put this behind Cloudflare.
Yep.
But, I know what you mean. It's a maze now of stuff. And then what's funny to me is you don't get rid of the web layer, the web server layer either, because you still, in order to make it robust and sustainable, you have to run Nginx in front of it anyway. So, I mean, now you've got 2 stacks.
Yeah.
Yes. And you don't know, now you got 2 things to troubleshoot.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a long time since I wrote any PHP, but I enjoyed it a lot, even though my code was probably horrible because it was among the first stuff I ever wrote for the web. But but it was a good time.
What is your main language now? Is it Ruby or?
It's JavaScript, definitely. If you count number of lines. I work mostly on React-based JavaScript apps.
Okay, all right.
So that's definitely my most number of lines.
I'm doing more React now just by default because we part of our value for value model at the index is people donate code to us, and so one of our guys on the podcastindex.social, our Mastodon server, popped up and said, hey, I wrote y'all a website because our website looked terrible, because we were going at rapid speed, and I'm not slowing down to write a pretty website.
No.
And so he popped up and said, hey, I wrote y'all a modern website, and he posted it up on GitHub, and I threw it up on a server, and we're good to go, but it's all React. And so I said, well, I guess I need to learn this stuff. So I'm getting up to speed on React, and I like it a lot.
I think React is nice as well. It solves a nice, pretty limited problem in a nice way, I think.
Do you remember the old? It's the old jQuery templates library. Did you ever use that?
No, I didn't really. I sort of slipped by around the edges of jQuery.
Oh, okay. Well, it was an interesting thing. I guess, gosh, that's probably been 10 years ago or more. Mm-hmm. But it was an interesting library. It was short-lived, but it allowed you to. It really reminds me of JSX.
Cool.
It was this weird mixture of HTML, and you'd drop in curly brackets, mm-hmm. and then write your JavaScript inside that. It was almost the reverse of JSX. It's like the React stuff is JavaScript with inline HTML, mm-hmm. and this was like the opposite. It was HTML with inline JavaScript.
Okay.
And it was interesting. It brings back memories. I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't as weird, because when you first see it, it probably shocks a lot of people to have HTML right there in your JavaScript, but. No. It didn't shock me that much because I was already used to the other way.
Yeah, I've seen this before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. We have some really old C++ code which drives a UI somewhere, and it occurred to me after working with React a couple of years that this code flow is really exactly what React is doing. It
Oh,
has all this logic for defining the UI, which is sent away, and then you get events back, which updates state, and then it just runs the UI rendering again.
okay. Yeah.
Like no ideas are new.
Yeah. No, it all comes back around. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's that cracks me up too. And sometimes the benefits of being old is that you see people trying to redo something that's already been done before in the past. It's like, well, okay. I mean, this is clever, but it's not new.
No.
So, did you ever write much C++?
No. I can read C++, and I can write some of our C++. But it's more of the thing that I know how our code works and how the thinking goes. I wouldn't let myself edit anyone else's C++ code.
Yeah, I think that's universal.
Yeah, probably.
The only C++ code that you like is the stuff that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, everybody else's C++ code is unintelligible.
Yeah, it's a different subset of the same language.
Yeah, I never really got. I don't think I've ever written a single line of C++. I pretty much went right from C to other things, and from what I understand, it's for a long time that whole ecosystem was a kind of a dumpster fire.
Yeah, I heard the same, and I've heard that it's picked up quite a bit in later revisions of the language. That it can be much cleaner now or much nicer.
I'm not sure why you would. I guess if you already are just so proficient and so good at it that you would keep going. Yeah. But when there's so many good alternatives now, like Rust and Swift, I'm not sure why you would, go back to C++ because you're not getting that much benefit.
No, it doesn't feel like it, but maybe someone else who listens can get in touch and explain to us why.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I sure hope so. Yeah. So jumping back a bit, I mean, setting up podcast index.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even know where to start. How hard is it to set up a podcast index?
It's funny. It's a strange mix of simple and a huge pain. Like it's not hard. You could think, you could sit down and think through it in an afternoon and come up with probably the same thing that we do. Mm-hmm. It's not that difficult, but the thing that makes it tricky is just the quantity of feeds that you're dealing with and how to get things in a timely manner. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the podcasting world, you can think there's on average, well, I should say that better. The true number of podcasts, quote unquote, is a little bit of an unknown, because you could take the Google approach and you could say, well, any feed out there that we detect even a single item with an enclosure in it, we're going to consider that a podcast. So they pretty much just vacuum up everything that they can find, every XML, RSS feed that they can find on the web, and if it has an enclosure in it anywhere, they can, it's a podcast. Yeah. You could take that approach and you end up with 2.5-3 million podcasts, but many of those are not even going to be podcasts. And so then you can take, a more conservative approach and say, well, we'll just suck down everything that Apple has in their directory, and we consider those, those to be fairly reliable and curated. And then you end up somewhere 1.6 million podcasts in the wild, and that's, you could say that's a pretty good estimate, because you're going to have. Then you think, okay, somebody went to the trouble to submit their podcast to Apple, and that kind of thing. So you probably say, well, that's probably a good bet.
Yeah, that those does it by accident.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have somewhere. We've got about a little over 1.3 million in our index, and I feel because we decided that we were not going to scrape Apple for data. if our whole idea here is to live outside of the Apple ecosystem and for them not to be the center of the universe, it would be a little disingenuous for us to then start, slurping down iTunes into.
That's a really good point now that you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah. So it may put us at a disadvantage to where we have fewer feeds, but it does. But I feel good. What matters to me is not that we have every feed in the world.
No.
What matters to me is that when somebody looks for something, that it's there.
Yeah.
And if we're meeting that goal, then then our process is good.
Yeah.
So so going back to your question, when you're dealing with 1.3 million feeds that we are, those feeds obviously have to be checked. They have to be downloaded and parsed rapidly and frequently.
Yeah.
And so that's really the challenge. And the challenge hits you in a few different pain points. It's bandwidth, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Then it is concurrency is your next challenge. And then the concurrency also creates another problem, which is your database throughput.
Oh, yes.
Because you can check, theoretically you could write your code and split it out into enough VMs to where, let's just say you had 100 aggregators that could download, and check every feed every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you can't feed that much data to a database. I mean, it's gonna kill you. So you have to. It's a constant balancing act between trying to get enough data quickly enough, but also keep your system in check on a normal budget.
Yeah.
Like, if you're Google, I mean, you throw 1,000 machines at this thing, you don't even blink an eye.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to do this for $300 a month or less in hosting fees, you gotta think about it in a different way. And so what we do, our infrastructure is basically we have an API, we have the API, and then we have the database, and then we have the aggregators. And the aggregators are constantly, every time they check a feed, they look to see what the difference was, what the time difference was between the last time that an episode was published in that feed and the next time an episode was published. The most current and the last. And so then they keep a running average of how often each podcast publishes. So they know sort of how aggressive to be with checking. If you got a podcast that only publishes once a month, well, then the next time they publish, if there's a couple of hours of lag between the time they publish and the time that we pick up the episode, it's probably not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Because they're only publishing, once a month or so anyway, or bi-monthly or whatever whatever this time frequency is. But if you have a podcast that's publishing every day, well then you want to be on top of that. I mean, you want to know within 15 minutes whether or not there's a new episode, because that might be something like a daily drive, a daily commute thing. So that's sort of the idea there is that we're kind of constantly it's not really an algorithm, but I mean, it's more just some logic there to try to be aggressive where it's necessary and not aggressive where it's not.
Yeah.
And to preserve sort of the simplicity of everything and not have to get our bills too high.
Yeah. It's a much more interesting balancing act. It sounds like than sort of the Google approach. Like, okay, I have unlimited resources. I write something really simple that just goes. Consumes everything.
yeah. One thing that helps us is we implemented WebSub or PubSub Hubbub support a couple of months ago, and if that was universal, if that was universally supported amongst all the podcast hosts, this wouldn't be a problem at all. We'd be able to aggregate everything efficiently, and without having to worry too much about balancing those resources as aggressively as we do. I don't know, do you know PubSub, Hubbub, or WebSub?
I've heard of it. I mean, is it basically that they could give you a push to say that now my content is updated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's an interesting topic because originally it was called PubSub Hubbub, which is the worst name ever.
It's fun to hear someone say, I can tell you.
Yeah, it is. It's fun to try to say.
Yeah.
But they changed the name to WebSub, and it's basically, it's exactly what you said. It's push notification or webhook or whatever you want to call it. And when you put into your XML feed, you put in two links. You put in a hub location, and you put in the feed URL location that's supposed to be canonical for the feed that it's referencing. And so a aggregator or consumer of that feed looks at those two URLs and then sends a request to the hub that says, I want to be notified every time there's an update to this feed. Yep. And you typically get 15 days, so roughly 2 weeks of subscription time per subscription. And if you don't renew with the hub, then you stop getting updates.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so you just provide a public endpoint in your subscription request. You provide your public endpoint where the notifications are going to be delivered to. And every time there's an update, quote unquote, every time there's an update, you get pinged.
Yeah.
And you know, okay, well, there's something there. And we know to go and pull that feed and check it.
Yeah.
What we have just a little under 800,000 active WebSub subscriptions.
Oh, that's a few.
It's a lot, yeah. It's, roughly half of the feed database that are active subscriptions to the hubs, and it helps a lot. But the problem is that there's a couple of problems. The first one is that some of the biggest podcast hosts don't support it. So Libsyn is one. They don't currently support that, and which is a problem because they got a lot of feeds. Mm-hmm. And then another problem is that the WebSub infrastructure is not as distributed as you would like it to be. There's really only two players. There's Superfeeder and Google. Google runs a hub, and Google's hub is free. So a lot of people obviously migrate. Everybody wants to go to
get Google Reader bad vibes.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Exactly. Perfect reference. And so everybody goes to that, but they're not it's not that it goes down, but you just don't get pinged sometimes. And I think it's just because it's overloaded.
Wouldn't be surprising, I guess.
Yeah, my estimate just from looking at logs, my rough guess is maybe it's 75-80% hit rate on that. So we're missing, I don't know, 20% on average of feeds that get updated. We just don't get a ping for through Google.
Yeah.
Now Superfeeder is rock solid, but it's a paid service. So, but what I'm pushing for right now with hosting companies, every chance I get, everyone I talk to, is that they begin to run their own hubs.
Yeah.
For their own feeds, because it's really, if you're talking about, let's say that you are, let's say you're Blueberry, and you have 20,000 feeds, or I'm not sure, I don't know what their numbers are, but I'm just going to make some stuff up.
Yep.
Let's just say you have 20,000 feeds, and you can handle updating your hub for 20,000 feeds.
Yeah, sure.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
that's not much load. That is an easy thing to do, um, and it helps the entire ecosystem, and especially like the smaller hosts, that only have maybe 5 to 10,000 feeds. I mean, that's a very easy thing for them to do, and then you don't have to be at the mercy of Google.
Yeah, it's it's feels like another one of those. Why aren't there more podcast indexes?
Yeah, yeah.
It
Why aren't
doesn't
there
really make any sense.
hubs? Yeah.
Once you point it out, yeah, why don't they have one?
I mean, it's a great solution to the problem
Yeah,
uh, of feed updates. It's beautiful, but yeah, that's fun. What's funny is that, I mean, our aggregators spend a lot of time just subscribing to to hubs. Wait, there's this whole set of logic there that every it runs once an hour and says, okay, well, here's the set of hub subscriptions that are about to expire. So here's the ones we need to renew, and it's just a constant stream of renewals that are going on, and it's a little inefficient in that regard, but it's fine. But there again, if the hosters ran their own hubs, then they could offer, since they have a less load, they could offer longer subscription times. They could offer 30-day subscription times.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it would probably save them a lot of bandwidth as well, because people wouldn't need to check if there are new episodes all the time.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to poll.
Yeah.
And that's 99% of their bandwidth cost.
Yeah, of course.
Is polling, and not considering the feed downloads, but
yeah, that's probably a bit as well.
Yeah, that was a dumb comment from me, but that's a huge part of it though, is the polling, and we saw that with the namespace development. We started running into some hosters who said, we would love to implement every tag in the world, but if we bloat the feeds up really large, that's gonna have a real impact on our bandwidth costs.
Yeah, I mean, that's also such a strange thing in this sort of modern world, in quotation marks, that it's easy to start thinking about bandwidth is pretty much free, but no, it's because I'm not posting anything.
yeah, it's totally not free at all, and that was one of the reasons why we made some of the choices we did with the namespace, because there were Podlove, who I mentioned earlier, had a chapter specification where they had the chapters were defined directly in the feed itself as tags. But if you potentially had, let's just say 30 chapters per episode, you could inflate your feed size, and you had 200 episodes in your feed. You could inflate your feed size up to 25 megabytes.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, and so that was the hosting companies just said, yeah, that's just a non-starter. We're not doing that. And so that's when we came up. That's when I contacted you and saw your spec, and I was like, well, we're already thinking, we already got JSON in mind anyway as an external file, so why don't we just do that? And that seemed to solve the problem, because then you don't have to. A lot of people are not going to request the chapters file anyway, so that's saved bandwidth right there.
Yeah. So I guess we should mention that part of the namespace is a chapters tag, and then that can refer to a JSON file which contains basically the same chapter information that my app can embed inside the MP3s, which is the old-fashioned way of doing chapters.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I just love that whole thing came together when. I don't even know how I found your app. I don't even know
I was
how
curious about that as well.
I really don't know. I don't know how I found that. I think I was just searching around for stuff, and I saw it and saw the JSON, and I was like, wait, that's like almost identical to what we just did. Let's merge this, and then it's an instant win-win for both of us.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny as well, because it wasn't that long ago that I added it to the app either. And
oh, really?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's in the release notes. I should go look it up, actually, because I did write it down. Let's see, release notes.
I have your app right here.
Export to JSON, April 21st, 2020.
Oh, that was this year.
Yeah. And I'm not really sure what I didn't really have a very clear use case in mind either. So it's all just happy coincidences.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really weird. And I even made this little feature where I could export the chapter JSON and then generate a little web player page for the podcast episode. So I could actually use it for something and try it out.
Yeah. And now, yeah, that's funny because I saw the web player thing and I was like, oh, that's so close. I bet we could do this in a way that doesn't totally screw up your code.
Yeah. And we could.
And then we can just drop that thing right in, and right out of the gate we have an app that supports it, and maybe that'll drive some traffic to your app.
Yeah.
How many users do you think you have?
It's a good question. I haven't really. I guess it should be a couple of hundred, maybe more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a paid upfront app, so that probably limits the number of people. I intend to make it, free and then an in-app purchase to unlock, because that's what makes sense to do in the modern world. But I haven't really got around to it. So
no, I like the free upfront and the in-app purchase. I like both of those models.
Yeah.
I know that some apps go the advertising model route, but I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard you can make more money that way.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I guess so, especially for the bigger apps. But I'm just, we have this mantra that the days of free need to die. Because it is. I mean, you're paying for it somehow.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, you're paying. And Paul from Sphinx Chat, he has, he says, he always says, free is very expensive.
Yeah, it's true.
And it is.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And so I like, and the upfront app purchases, they may not provide enough, sustaining revenue for an application, but then you can always go with the model that's the donation pledge model, where you say, well, hey, check, just pop up a reminder, hey, I'm still here and I'm still updating this app, and I still need to put food on the table, so help me out.
So anyway, I guess that was it's really funny that the whole chapter thing became a thing in the standard. So
I'm looking forward to expanding that too, because I don't know if you've seen on the GitHub repo, but there's been a lot of good comments about things like adding like location information to the chapter spec, which would be great if you had like if you did an episode on on a certain country, I don't know, like a travel podcast, and you say, well, here's all the different places and latitude, longitude locations that we went for each chapter, and that just sounds like such a rich, wonderful experience.
Yeah, it feels like it could enable so many fun things and new ideas. I mean, it certainly made me start thinking of new things as well, because in some sense I felt like podcast chapters does what it does, and it works with ID3 metadata, and sure, there's more stuff you could do there, but the thing that people actually use is what's in the podcast players, and that's kind of de facto standard. What people do is what people do, and that's what we can support.
Right. Yeah.
But now there's suddenly a standard for working with more information that's actually getting picked up in more players, and there's sort of push behind it, which ID3 metadata hasn't had in ages, if ever, I think. So it made me start thinking, like, are there more things that my app could do to like help be a good part of the ecosystem? Maybe I could start working more with RSS data, or exposing other things that the standard will support in the future somehow.
One of the things that the silo companies like Spotify have is that, or Stitcher, or these companies like that they have a full stack, and so they have the player all the way to the back end and everything in between, and they can do they flex their muscles to do rich content, or they actually, what's funny is they haven't done a lot of that, but they've done a little bit where they do things like a poll during during a podcast, and it pops up on your screen and you can take a poll, and those are all things that could be done with chapters.
Yeah.
Very easily,
Yeah, there's so much you could do.
And that makes the open podcast ecosystem just as feature rich as the siloed ecosystem.
Yeah.
But you don't have to sell your soul,
Exactly. Which is it's nice when you can get it like that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, because I don't listen to podcasts on Spotify, but from what I've seen, I guess the only time I listen to them is when I'm trying to get clips for the show to make fun of them. But when I have seen that experience, I mean, it's not even as good as a regular podcast player.
No, it's weird, really.
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
They're trying to like put together podcast playlists for you, and it's like episodes of varying length from podcasts I've never heard of in some kind of random order, and I've never listened to any podcast inside Spotify, so they have no idea what I like either.
Yeah, that whole thing. I talked about this before with Adam. Is I don't. It's the same problem as the Pandora recommendation algorithm type stuff, where there's this idea that you can that if you just have enough data about a person, that you can AI your way or machine learning your way into discovery.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's true. I've never once found an interesting podcast that I ended up enjoying enough to stick with it long term through any type of discovery algorithm. The way that I always find podcasts that I end up enjoying and wanting to listen to long term is through word of mouth or a reference by somebody in an article somewhere. It's always human suggestion. It's never an algorithm.
Yeah, I'm 99.9% sure that goes for me too.
Yeah, because it's the same way with. I use this example. I'm a big fan of Rush, the rock band, and they're a power trio. And so if you know that I listen, if you're a Spotify or your Pandora or blah blah blah, and or Apple Music, and you know that I listen to a lot of Rush, you could analyze all that and say, okay, this band is from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's considered a classic rock band. It's a three-piece band. It's got, the music has these tonal qualities. The singer sounds like this. You could analyze 300 different data points about this band, and you can recommend similar bands based on that. And I guarantee you, I will not listen to any of them.
Yeah.
Because there's something specific about that band that's not the same as other bands.
Yeah. I'm not listening because I've been looking for the idealized version of this type of band and found Rush. I'm listening because I like Rush.
That's a great way to describe it. Yeah. I didn't have a set of criteria that I was looking for the perfect band that fit these criteria.
Yeah.
It's just, no, I want that band.
Yeah.
And that's the same way with podcasts. I think it's like, I don't listen to podcasts because they're quote unquote like about tech, or they're about Apple, or they're about podcasting. I listen to them mostly because of the people.
Yeah.
You feel like you have a connection to the podcaster, to the host, the co-host, and you develop a sort of audio relationship with those people over time. And,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You can't replicate. You can't put that into a algorithm. It's just not. To me, it's just not doable.
No, it's something else. I mean, yeah, it's a personal relation of some kind.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And you can't, there's nothing about that that you can, that it's sort of like the difference between, it's like trying to figure out that philosophical problem about what the mind and the brain is. There's certain things that are true of the mind that are not true of the brain. So, like one thing would be, if you're trying to say, well, are thoughts the same thing as synapses firing in the brain? And you can, there are things about thoughts that are not true about synapses firing in the brain. One thing would be aboutness. Synapses firing in the brain do not have aboutness. They're not about anything. It's just an electrical impulse. But thoughts have aboutness. Thoughts are about things.
Yeah.
And so if you have properties of thoughts that are not the same as properties of brain functions, then those two things are not identical. And it's the same. I think we have to divorce ourselves from this notion that we can sort of science our way or engineer our way out of every problem, or we can engineer a solution to every possible problem that we could ever think of, because there are things that are true about humans and about the way humans are that are indefinable. They're inscrutable. You're just not going to be able to place quantitative measurement on those things. And I think that is what makes artificial intelligence artificial.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it as well.
Yeah, there are just things that are not, you can't define in code. No. Humans are not machines. We're something different, and that kind of really ties back into the whole idea of of sort of where we started with Podcast Index is the platform for freedom of speech. We're strong. Or I'm not going to speak for Adam, but I'm a strong believer in people are the most equal when they're the most free. And the way that you achieve maximum equality is through maximum freedom. And so anything that attempts to encroach on that freedom should be suspect from the very beginning. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. And it doesn't mean by default that it's wrong. It just means that we should all be highly skeptical of anything that wants to diminish our freedom, because with every diminishment of freedom is a potential diminishment of equality. And I think that this unholy, I'm just gonna keep going down this rabbit trail. Okay, I'm way off in the black hole here, but anything like this unholy marriage between technology and the political sphere that we've seen develop over the last 15 years, it's really concerning to me. And if this little index or whatever we're doing over here can be even one crack in that system or one chink in that system, I think it's worth doing, just because that I don't see big tech giving up the position that they have achieved now willingly. No. And it's got too much. They got too much benefit from it, and it's gotten into the political system to where, today, Apple and Spotify. Today, Apple may be taking Alex Jones off the air, and then the next day, Spotify may be taking a Joe Rogan episode with Alex Jones down, or deplatforming QAnon conspiracy podcasts. And everybody may be like, well, okay, those are kooky, and we're okay with that because it's not our podcasts. Well, tomorrow it may be your podcast, because the late one thing that I've brought up before with Adam is, if you go back 25 years ago, the whole idea of censorship was revolved around mostly religious people or religious institutions censoring atheists and that wing of the world. And now it's almost completely reversed. Now you have religious people that are worrying about themselves being censored. And so these things change. The whims of social movements change, can change quickly. And so the people in power that may seem to align with your political bent or your philosophical bents today, those people may not be in power 10 years from now, and the things may swing against you. So it's always, the correct answer is always to err on the side of freedom and freedom of speech versus giving away your power to powerful oligarchs and technology companies and the super rich, and that will always backfire. We've seen. I mean, if we've learned anything from history, that's true. So I think that it all, this stuff really all in my mind, it really all does tie together. I mean, if you have technology that the machine learning and artificial intelligence and advertising, and these are all things that attempt to, if not directly take away our freedom or censor us, they also could result in the diminishment of us as human agents. That they attempt to reduce us to just simply machines, or it's a dehumanizing force. I guess that's the best way to put it. That's the 10-minute philosophical answer to the question to the question that I don't even remember anymore.
That's what podcasts are for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great.
Getting some breathing room to sort of work things through by saying them out loud.
So, learning by talking.
yeah, exactly. I mean, sort of. Considering what you put your support behind, or what you give your support away to, I guess.
Yeah.
Totally. Starting to build something instead of relying on the free with ads and data collection platform or something like that.
Yeah, and we would never, we'll never. I'm never going to criticize someone for taking something off their own platform. Overcast. They deplatformed Alex Jones as well. I think they did it before. I think he did it before Apple even did it. And so, but that's it. But that's his personal freedom. I mean, that's it. That's his.
Of course.
That's his. He has a contract with his customers, and that is 100% his choice. And I'm never going to criticize him for it. But in the situation that we're in, as more and more power begins to amass in the hands of fewer and fewer technology oligarchs, if you want to call them, that does become a problem. Yeah. And I will criticize that freely and as often as I can, but because that's bad for it. That's bad for everyone, especially when Spotify that's trying to they're spending billions of dollars to buy up as much podcast infrastructure and as many podcasts as they can. When I see somebody going that route, that is definitely worth criticizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's always worth criticizing where too much is gathered by too few, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. We've gone long, I realize.
Oh, I don't know how long you usually go on your show, but I get as much in the tank as you need.
Yeah. I was just worried, that sort of thing. Oh, maybe you have to be somewhere.
No. I'm good with whatever you What is the? It's like 1:30 in the afternoon here. What time is it there in Sweden?
It's 8:30 in the evening here. So
Oh, okay.
It's a nice good time like that. I was just surprised when I looked at how long we had been recording already. Yeah, but maybe it's time to finish up for this time. I feel like we could do another episode over 5 easily because there's so much we didn't talk about.
Yeah, let's do that, and we need to have you on the Podcasting 2.0 show too.
No, I would love that.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do. We probably we should probably do that in January maybe if you got the time.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do it. We'll put something on the calendar for January. We have if anybody who's listening to the podcast is interested in the API or any of the stuff we're doing, the best place to join is podcastindex.social. That's where you're on there, and we've got a lot of Martin's from Denmark, and we got a lot of European presence on there, and just it's an international fun time, and we have, so anybody can go and join and participate, and API keys are easy to get if you want to go to api.podcastindex.org and get some API keys and start playing around with stuff. It's it's easy.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's great. I had a good time.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.